Hey, my name is Dan Carroll. I'm Field CTO for Dell Technologies Federal. I'm here today with Brandon Harden. Brandon, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Brandon Harden. I am one of the enterprise architects in Dell Federal.
So we're here today to talk to you about what I'd say is the all evolving and changing needs of what we'll call multi-cloud solutions within the federal government. Uh, Roughly 10, 12 years ago, the federal government realized that cloud was going to play an integral part in where they went from a strategic perspective in their IT solutions. The first initiatives rolled out around that from the federal government were called Cloud First. This was the idea that, hey, we're going to just try to minimize our data centers as much as possible and realize these, amazing savings that were going to be promised by public cloud consumption. Since then, with what I'd say is continually evolving ideas around what cloud means, they have now moved to what we're calling a cloud smart model. That means that there are different types of clouds that provide different types of functionality that the federal government and DoD are now leveraging based on how those functionalities and capabilities can support their mission, right? So using the right cloud solution for the right data mission, right? So that's what we're going to talk through today. And Brandon has been doing some amazing work in developing a multi-hybrid cloud solution for the DoD that is going to help them really be able to harness some amazing capabilities to help them with workload placement. Hey, Brandon, can you go through and kind of tell us the story?
So the first thing is from a cloud perspective is the entire like multi-cloud service delivery. As Dan already pointed out, there are multiple different scenarios for clouds. There's, offerings from the public cloud as well as on-premise clouds that different organizations and agencies may have for themselves. This here is a representation of how that all looks, like to bring it all together so that you can have one place to essentially service.
Okay. Yeah. So let me ask you quite a couple of questions around this, Brandon. So I think the biggest challenges that the federal government faces and some of the stuff that they're trying to do is they need to realize, cost effectiveness. They need to be able to realize how to leverage the different types of workload placements and the advantages of that. How does this solution help with that?
So this would go through like a user portal, like so in this case, so like you use something like an ITSM or an ITOM or anything that can sit in the middle, right? So then a user goes into there and it has a catalog and a policy engines, and based off of the different policies that are set by the organization, the workloads would be put into the appropriate cloud offering, whether it's a container as a service offering that may be sitting inside of Amazon or something that's more traditional sitting inside your on-prem cloud, or something else that may be more active in say Google or Microsoft Azure. At the end of the day, we don't really care where it sits at. We just want to help the end user be able to orchestrate and automate as much as possible to get their workloads where they're needed and at the most cost efficient, right? So everybody's looking at cost nowadays, especially with some of the market things that we see, some of the financials that people are having to like, deal with. At the end of the day, they want to have their cloud services and their cloud models, but at the same time, they want to operate and the most efficiently and the most cost-effective way possible. So that's what our goal is here, right?
Yeah, what's interesting about this is I think that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this solution also provides you a couple elements. Like you said, there's financial transparency, which is critical, right? So if I put a workload in a specific area, what are the costs to me? And then what are possibly my costs from a tenant perspective on what they're utilizing. The second element of this is around continuity of operations, the capability to effectively and automatically deploy data solutions and then be able to operate those data solutions once deployed in a common management environment. Is that kind of what this solution
No,
does?
no, you're exactly right. So as you're building out your workload in the service catalog, one of the options, one of the features inside of there is it will break out and tell you how much it should cost you on a monthly basis. Within a margin of error, of course, but it should give you what it's going to cost to have it in each of the different like cloud offerings. This way you could decide on where to put it based on cost, but you could also look at things too as how it runs, the performance of it and things of that nature. Then once it's deployed, you can also see on a daily basis how much that workload is costing. So you can also verify what the original costing models were telling you. That way, if it's not working out, the idea is that you can move a workload from one cloud to another seamlessly and not have to incur like a multitude of costs to do so.
And what I love about that is the biggest challenges that we face. Long time ago, I used to be a much bigger wrench turner in the IT. I was very much terrified of vendor lock-in. I would assume this solution helps us avoid that vendor lock-in through the automation and capability to move workloads based on this infrastructure. Is that true?
That is true. We strive to make sure that there isn't a vendor lock-in to go from one. This way, you can go from one cloud to another, and then also a lot of times the vendor lock-in can be storage related. So we do have. It's not just the model. It's also the infrastructure and how it's deployed that helps with that vendor lock-in, right? So technically, there's not really a vendor lock-in. It's just like how costly is it to move it between clouds? It could be cost prohibitive to do so, not necessarily vendor lock-in.
That's outstanding. Your next slide, I think, goes into a little detail about the infrastructure. You want to talk us through that?
Sure. So I know this could be kind of an eye chart, and we're not going to necessarily get, bogged down on individual like hardware components. Like this is more of a representation, and any of these components can be changed out, at will or, by, based off of requirements of whatever the contract may be or whatever the organization may want to see. Right. So we use ServiceNow for that ITSM, the ITOM that we talked about. So
Mm-hmm.
this is the central gateway, as you can, if you'd like to call it that, right? So the user would log into ServiceNow, and anything and everything that we use feeds back into it. ServiceNow is not the end all be all, but we do try to strive to make it the single pane of glass for a user to access, manage, and deploy, as well as decommission any workloads within the cloud, within the entire enterprise, right? So a user would go in, they would pick through the service catalog, and then based off of their profile, they may see some things by default, but they can still see the entire catalog. And based off their permissions, they can deploy different aspects of the catalog. They'd make their selection and essentially hit submit. Depending on the items in the catalog they chose, it'll go through a series of approvals and a workflow before it's actually deployed. And then once it gets ready to be deployed, after it gets through all the approvals, it'll get some automation may happen directly in ServiceNow. Others may have to be handed off to other automation tools, whether it be Ansible, Terraforms, VMware's Aria. It just depends on what the users ask for and and where it's being done at, right? So some of it, if it's done in the public cloud, may or may not go through one of these four automation engines as well as ServiceNow. And then at the core of the data center is, of course, we're going to have some Dell hardware. In this case, it's vSAN running on top of VxRail, right? So, and from there, we can build all these different things on there. You can have the container as a service, your container options on here. You can have your traditional VM workloads on here, and then all your different services on top of that, databases, web application servers, a VDI infrastructure. And of course, we have to have monitoring so that we can make sure that everything is operating in a seamless, efficient fashion, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's just your core, right? So the idea between like on how we here at Dell look at things is, you can start to bolt on things off of this core, whether it be a software factory, some kind of mission analytics platform, or federated analytics, so you can do analytics at your edge, AI ML platforms, cloud storage. But speaking of storage, there's the big component where we talked about like trying to lock in from one cloud to another. And that's using technologies like Vicinity and other things to essentially put your storage adjacent to your cloud, right? So access your cloud storage in an environment that you control. Like you control where the storage is, you control how it's stored, you control the metadata, the permissions, but you can still have your workloads that are sitting in the cloud access this data, right? So that way, like if you are running containers, you can move your containers between the different cloud platforms without any kind of like lock-in or any kind
Excellent.
of massive amounts of cost from a storage perspective. A lot of, I know there's a lot of people that are concerned about cost of storage. We've seen it in large enterprises and we've seen it in, smaller places as well. Maybe they don't have a huge budgets for cloud, and cloud can become a runaway train, if you would, on cost and bloat and things that just people may deploy and then forget about, and as in any cloud or virtual environment could happen.
So let me ask you a question. You mentioned VMware. I mean, we have a capability also, if we wanted to deploy this on Red Hat OpenShift and other platforms as well. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. Like and that's what we're saying here. Like we're using this here on VMware, but absolutely we are not locked to one particular thing. So this was using VxRail on this particular one, but there's also we can use something like PowerFlex, and then in which case there you can run Microsoft or Red Hat on top of that. So we're not really locked into any one particular vendor or technology. We could do a mixture of different things on top of that, and we can mix and match, right? So if you're running a VMware base, you can still run OpenShift on Red Hat on top of VMware for a container solution as well. We do have some customers that are doing that in different places, but it's up to you. Like we're here to satisfy the requirements of the end user, the end customer, in the best way possible for them.
That's
Is it?
interesting. Well, I think your next slide actually covers what I'd say is what I'd say is the breadth of options we have. Am I wrong that as it relates to kind of how it builds? Please go ahead.
Yeah. So this slide is like what we were talking about with PowerFlex, right? So at the base of it, you have the PowerFlex software
Hmm.
that it uses a unified file and block systems for your storage, that you can also have it replicate across different sites and things. It allows you to run bare metal virtual machines and containers on the same hardware, in the same cluster, right? So whereas other systems you may have, whether it be Red Hat, Microsoft, or VMware, like from a hypervisor standpoint, if you have a cluster of one of those, that's all you're doing is you're running that cluster of hypervisors. With
Hmm.
PowerFlex, we can have a single cluster to share the storage across the entire cluster, but within that cluster, we can have a container environment that's either run on bare metal or virtualized on one of the different platforms. You can have your virtual machines, and then you can actually have full bare metal servers that are like, where you may have a workload that consumes the entire server. With
Excellent.
that said, like you could also have multiple clusters of different virtualization clusters in it. So you can have a Red Hat cluster, you can have a VMware cluster, and you can have a Microsoft cluster, all within the same PowerFlex cluster of hardware services.
Excellent.
It's a fully um, it's a full HCI system that's not based on any one hypervisor. It's outside of the hypervisor. And then, of course, here's a lot of the applications and things that you can run on top of it, of ideas that can be done.
That's incredible. That's great. And what I like is the focus on consolidation, because that has probably always been the historical challenge, is all of these varying systems, all of these varying applications and application rationalization. This type of solution lets you start working towards how you consolidate all of those things into a common infra. I don't want to say common infrastructure, but a common management plane to leverage your infrastructure more effectively from across the enterprise. Yeah.
That's true, and it also integrates from an automation standpoint. Dell already has, I believe, several automation work run books, or depending on which automation tool you're using, they'll call them run books or other items. But to help integrate in with that single management plane that we were discussing earlier with ServiceNow.
Sure.
It also, PowerFlex allows you to expand your compute and storage independently of each other. So you can add storage. If you're running low on storage, you can add a storage node to the cluster and not have to increase your compute on a linear basis. You can add compute independently of storage, and you can add storage independently of compute. So it's a very versatile system in that regards.
Well, and I assume, Dell provides industry-leading data protection solutions. How does that tie into this?
Uh, of course we do, as well as they integrate
I think you got a slide on this,
seamlessly in
don't
there.
you?
We
Yeah.
do, we do, we do.
Yeah.
So we didn't really talk about it on the larger slide, even though it was kind of up there in the top left. But of course, with this much infrastructure, you're going to need to have a way to back it up, right? So, and not only that, but Dell's backup solutions work both on-prem as well as in the cloud. So you can have it all within the same environment, right? So Dell has appliances that can run in the major clouds. I believe it's in the three major ones, right? So
Yeah,
it's in,
AWS, Google, and Azure. Yeah, you're spot on. We offer, basically that data protection solutions within those. So that way, again, it brings you back to that common operational model, right? The capability to do anything anywhere. So yeah.
right. And there's a common management plane for the backups themselves, but then that management plane integrates in with the larger management plane that we talked about with ServiceNow. So this way you can go in and create all your policies for like how often you back up, how long, what's your retention policies and things of that nature. You build that within the backup management plane, but then that allows you to integrate that in with the enterprise management plane that allows you to create backups for your individual workloads, your containers, and then you can also have it go in and create backups, immediately outside of the policy. So maybe you're in there doing some maintenance. You need to do, something that's not, scheduled because of whatever it might be, right? A security threat came out, and you need to something needs
Quickly
to
respond.
mitigate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Right. You have to respond to it. So in that case, you can like take a quick backup of it before you do it, because maybe it's something that didn't get tested properly or whatever. So all these options are there for that, and as well as the replication, right? So you can when you're backing things up in the cloud, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, you can replicate these backups to another site that's for on-prem, or you can replicate it to a cloud, or from the cloud to the on-prem. So it's very versatile on how we do backups and what's out there for the Dell infrastructure, as well as the public clouds for the backups.
That's great. That's great. And this all ties together, right? So to me, this entire conversation ties in with the goals around digital transformation, which is there are many things I always say, and digital transformation is a journey that never ends, right? You're never going to reach your destination. There's always going to be new technologies, new ways
Right.
of looking at the world. So on your next slide, can you give us a little bit of detail on your perspective around how this all drives towards that goal?
Right. So this slide is like we're sitting here looking at like all the different things that are out there, right? So you have carriers that are out there, like Verizon and AT&T. You have data center like partners like Equinix and the fabrics that they bring together, right? And you have 5G, you have the public clouds, you have remote sites, you have labs, you have your core facilities, and you have the edge. The idea that like how we look at things is like it will always be a journey. Like you will, like you said, we will never reach that destination, the finish line. There will always be something new. There'll always be new requirements. There'll be, the mission continues, right? So
100%. Yeah.
it, so what we're looking at is like we look at it from a sense of at our core, we need to be able to manage all that stuff. And then you have like your core facilities, whether it's on-prem or in a colo, like it doesn't really matter where it's at. At the end of the day, we need to be able to bolt on new services either from a cloud provider, a partner, or adding bandwidth or adding 5G technologies. All of these things need to integrate together. They need to be able to be housed anywhere at any time, and the end user shouldn't know the difference.
Yeah, it
That's
should be a
the goal,
consistent
right? We should
experience regardless of where that data is coming from or where it's being accessed. Yeah.
exactly. And also on top of that, not just a consistent experience for the user, but we'd like to be able to provide this in a consistent financial model for the agency or organization that's running it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to hit on, kind of closing this out and coming to the end here. What I would say is what's interesting about this too is I want to touch on two key areas. One is Dell's capability around this, right? So we can deliver this directly to customers, and we also love to work with the federal system integrator community. What I see around the federal system integrator community, the value with them is us bringing in this core capability and them with their years and depth of experience on how the customers and organizations within the federal government and DoD operate, how they can line their services around this to make these type of solutions easier to integrate and operate and execute. And then also finally, from the financials perspective, there are so many different ways to what I'd say is cut this cake, right? You can eat it by the bite. You can eat it by, you can buy the whole cake. It all depends on how you want to consume that from a financials perspective to basically balance your CapEx, OpEx challenges, right? That's key. Any final thoughts, Brandon, before we kind of close out on this?
No, I think you were dead on with the system integrators. Like, so the idea behind all this is, we're here to partner with the integrators as well as the customers. We want to be there for them, right? So we can do this in a manner like the integrators are, I believe, are key, right? Because you're right, they have the depth, they have the knowledge that is there from a federal standpoint. So being able to partner with any one of the system integrators to help them get this fully deployed and turn it over to them, I think is going to be paramount, right? And Dell's always there for the financial models, and within the federal space, we absolutely create custom financial offerings to help make sure that we are balancing that CapEx, OpEx for the customer.
Excellent. Well, this is a great discussion, a great what I'd say is overview, and we would encourage anybody if you have a deeper interest in like digging deeper into how we do these type of solutions and even this particular solution, please reach out to us. We're always willing to talk, and thank you so much for the time, Brandon.
All right, thank you, Dan.